Greeting ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Asian Vision Dialogue. Meet me, him Sothearoth, the host of today's program. So the topic of today's discussions, it's about the analysis of the Vietnam-China relation, the implications, progress, and challenges. We have the guest speaker today, Dr. Kosal, the Associate Professor of Political Science at the Brooklyn Center, the City University of New York, and he's also the advisor to the Asian Vision Institute, AVI. So greeting, Dr. Kosal.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Kosal, while the history between Vietnam and China has described as one of the most connected in the Southeast Asia, and we've known that Vietnam is one of the countries that have a firm position toward China, especially in the South China Sea. So in overall picture, what does the relation between Vietnam and China look like, and especially during the current context?
Thank you for an excellent question. I want to go back to history of the Sino-Vietnamese relations so that we can talk about the trends of Sino-Vietnamese relations today. Historically, China and Vietnam, as you mentioned, are culturally, politically, and geographically connected. They are close neighbors. Their history is closely connected. Just venture into the modern history of the two countries, right? In the post-1945 war, Vietnam received enormous economic assistance. When the Democratic Republic of Vietnam came into existence. So Chinese supported the Vietnamese wholeheartedly, generously, to win the war against the French during the First Indochina War, against the United States during the Second Indochina War. But they end up having a war between themselves in 1979. We call it the Third Indochina War. So historically, the two countries exhibit a pattern of conflict and cooperation, or conflict and cooperation, vice versa. Today, we also see the possibility of conflict and also the possibility of cooperation at the same time. So it is a mixture of conflict and cooperation. Why I'm saying that? In terms of the South China Sea, the maritime territory dispute, the two countries can actually move toward a conflict at any point in time. But economically, China is Vietnam's largest investor, and also China is also second largest export market for Vietnam. So economically, the two countries have close relation, beneficial relation. But in terms of maritime dispute, the two countries can evolve into from dispute into conflict at any time because of all these controversial issues in the South China Sea.
So in relation to your answer, since Vietnam got quite a good benefit of economic from China, so in terms of South China Sea, we've actually known that Vietnam tried to be move toward the West. So do you think that it is a good calculation for Vietnam to move toward the West while the economic benefit of Vietnam are actually absorbed some of them are actually from China?
In terms of Vietnam's China policy, in my view, Vietnam has adopted a policy of resistance and accommodation toward China. So resistant in the sense that if China continue to bully Vietnam in the South China Sea, Vietnam is willing to move closer to the West, especially the United States, to receive modern military technology so that they can prevent any Chinese invasion of any islands in the South China Sea. But at the same time, I don't think Vietnam's are looking into a war. They don't want a war with China. Why I'm saying that? Because in recent history, when Vietnam was united under the Communist Party of Vietnam in 1975, Vietnam rapidly moved closer to an extra-regional power, and in that case, the Soviet Union, sort of the most powerful socialist country in the system, against China, right? So the result of that Vietnam siding with the Soviet Union was a catastrophe. Economic sanction imposed by China between 1975 and 1978, leading to enormous destruction of the industrial power of the United Vietnam after 1975, because most of those spare parts came from China, and China basically put on freeze, no more funding, cut off completely the fund to support those industrial projects supported by China. An economic sanction followed by territorial dispute. and leading to the Third Indochina War, 1979 war, the war that both sides claimed to be victorious. So Vietnam has learned a sobering lesson from siding with an extra-regional power against China. Move fast forward into today, I don't think that Vietnam want to completely side with the United States against China either. Vietnam want to follow a policy of accommodation and resistance, as I mentioned earlier. Why? Because the world today, as I mentioned earlier, is become more fluid, right? United States is an offshore balancer, it's too far away from the region to actually exercise enormous use of force against China in a scenario where the two countries, Vietnam and China, come into conflict. So Vietnam's realized that a war with China is a no-win for Vietnam, right? China has the power to inflict enormous damage, as they saw during the Third Indochina War 1979. So a short answer to that is that when, in what scenario that Vietnam would completely side with the West, I would say that siding with the West, especially the United States, is Vietnam's last resort. If China continues to push Vietnam to the corner, and fueled by domestic nationalism and so on, that would lead to a full-blown conflict between the two countries. But I don't see that. I see that as a remote possibility because just last month, right, the 14th meeting of China-Vietnam Steering Committee for Bilateral Cooperation, top leadership on both sides have reset their relationship. They're committed to practical cooperation. They're committed to the code of conduct. So there's more discussion about the code of conduct. There's high-level exchanges of visit and also communication, information between the top leadership and also between the military of the two countries. So that, I think, a trend toward avoiding war. So it's because both countries want to avoid war, because war would be a no-win for both countries.
Okay. So with regard to the process of COC negotiation, we have actually acknowledged that back to the last 10 years, in 2012, because of the issue of the South China Sea, that Cambodia cannot issue the joint communique. But recently, the recent 55th ASEAN Foreign Minister meeting, we have well known that Cambodia are able and successfully able to issue the joint communique. And in that joint communique, we have the issues of the South China Sea. So in this connection, what is the current status between China and Vietnam? Because we see that the discussion of the South China Sea back in the last 10 years and this year are quite different. So has they become more friendlier?
I would say that the trend has become more positive. I closely follow the 14th meeting of between the top leadership, Foreign Minister Wang Yi and the standing Deputy Prime Minister Pham Binh Minh in southern China last month. And I've seen that they want to reset the relationship because they have to. There's no other way. Because South China Sea should be a sea of peace, not a sea of war and conflict. Because that will be a no-win for both China and Vietnam. And I think that the two countries can find a way to avoid conflict. Because there's a lot of baseline, common interest between the two countries, right? Both countries share socialist ideology, right? The peaceful environment of the region is conducive to economic development for both countries, and also the high level of exchanges in terms of information sharing between the two leadership of the two countries. And so I think there's a lot of capital for the two countries to move forward. And I'm very pleased personally to see that China actually step up to make positive changes. The code of conduct is fundamental because ASEAN community is too weak, and China has to be committed to be willing to provide strategic assurance, to take costly action, meaning China willing to lose. To take unilateral action to support a peaceful institution in the South in Asia, particularly between relations between Southeast Asia and China. The code of conduct is a step forward toward institutionalize the security community, ASEAN and China, and renounce the use of force. And there is an institution, a rule-based institution. You can call it a sub-regional rule-based institution, because ASEAN has to move from a talk shop to a more rule-based security community, where you have the rule of the road that really regulate international relations in the region, and turning South China Sea into a seas of peace and development.
So from your perspective, do you think that the issue of South China Sea will eventually, or to a greater extent, it can be resolved? And what should be the actions that the ASEAN member state, the Vietnam and China should do in order to reduce the tension, or to some extent resolve the tension peacefully?
Right. Bilaterally, the Vietnamese and the Chinese top leadership have taken steps to do that, right? Creating hotlines between the two army. Top leadership exchanges I talked about earlier. But for ASEAN in general, and for Cambodia in particular, I think there's a role for them to play. First, ASEAN again should speak with one voice, become more united. It is not united at this point, unfortunately. But ASEAN should be more united when it comes to the security of the region, because it basically benefits everybody, right? Everybody has an interest in ensuring that conflict will not break out. And so, in short, I think ASEAN should move from simply a dialogue, confidence building, into a more rule-based security community, in my view, in terms of security sector. The code of conduct is a good step toward that, right? I'm pleased to say that Cambodia play a unique role. Vietnam is not intimate with China. Yeah? There's a comprehensive partnership between the two countries, but Vietnam is not intimate with China. On the other hand, Cambodia is intimate with China. But at the same time, Cambodia has no interest. It's not a party to the South China Sea conflict. So Cambodia can play a diplomatic role in terms of subtle diplomacy. The ruling party of Cambodia is close to the Communist Party of Vietnam, has a strong traditional tie with the Communist Party of Vietnam, but also very intimate with China. So Cambodia can play a unique role in brokering peace in the region.
So thank you, Dr. Kosal. Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to an end of our episode today. So thank you, Dr. Kosal, for spending your priceless time in attending in our program. Thank you, and see you in the next episode.